Welcome, friends, to another edition of Economic Update, a weekly program devoted to the economic dimensions of our lives and those of our children. I'm your host, Richard Wolff. I want to remind you, as usual, that our volunteer, Charlie Fabian, is ready and willing to receive your emails with whatever suggestions, documents, topics you would like to have us consider for the design of this program in the months and years ahead. You can reach him by email at charlie.info438@gmail.com. Once again, charlie.info438@gmail.com. Today's program is especially interesting, I think. It will have its first half around three topics: the exploding global market in Chinese electric vehicles and what that's about, the class struggle between employers and employees, which never stops, but has now got a new area for struggle. That's between working at home, working remotely, and working in the office or at the work site. And finally, the revelations by the Reuters news service in England of a program by the American military to persuade people not to get vaxxed against COVID, spending your and my tax dollars to do that, in the Philippines because they were using Chinese vaccines. The same government that was pushing vaccines on Americans was pushing the opposite way in the Philippines. Something to think about. In the second half, we're going to have a special guest. Her name is Kristen Gonzalez. She's a socialist, and she's also the senator from the 59th District of New York State, the youngest woman ever to be elected to the New York State Senate. And she'll be our guest, and we'll have interesting things to share with us. So let's get started. For the first time in history, in the year just ended, 2023, Chinese cars, that is, cars produced by a Chinese producer, sold more cars around the world than all U.S. brands combined. Chinese car sales, 13.4, both fossil fuel and electric. U.S. brands worldwide, 11.9 million. Why do I bring this up? Because it is evidence of the changing world economy, which is a central topic of this program and always has been. The role of the United States, which was once the absolutely dominating force in the global economy, keeps shrinking, while that of China keeps rising. And we have become used to, for the last century and a half, that there's one industry that's kind of a marker for the importance any country has. And that industry is the automobile industry. It got its start in the Western European and North American markets, which were the overwhelmingly dominant economic players in the world economy when automobile production became an important industry. And that continued until another country figured out a way to become a powerhouse in the world, and the automobile was for them the key. That's Japan, as you all know, when Toyota and Nissan and all the others began to muscle out the former dominance of GM, Ford, Chrysler, and so forth. And now there is a new player who's in the process of muscling Europe, America, and Japan out of the way as it becomes the dominant player. And the number one brand you might want to get to know, BYD. BYD. They are the dominant automobile producer in China. Okay. Not only are the Chinese producing globally competitive cars, but they are especially competitive, as I have noted before, in the electric automobile and the electric truck, which is likely the wave of the future in private vehicles. There they are so dominant, even more than they are in the gasoline-powered vehicle, that the United States and Europe, trying desperately to hold on in the face of this competition, have now levied enormous tariffs, 48% in Europe, 100% here in the United States, against China. And the Chinese have reacted, and their reaction teaches us another lesson. The Chinese have focused on selling cars in the rest of the world, Asia, Africa, Latin America. That's where they're putting their energy, and they're becoming the dominant automobile producer. And sooner or later, industries in North America and Western Europe and Japan are going to suffer competitively in the world because they're having to buy automobiles and trucks at the high protected price given their tariffs. And they're not going to be able to compete successfully with companies in Asia, Africa, and Latin America that can get cars and trucks that are better in quality and cheaper in price. It won't survive. It never does historically. What the Chinese automobile reality has already become is a mechanism for economically isolating the United States and Europe. It's not just anymore a question of those parts of the world no longer having the dominance they had in the previous 2 or 3 centuries. They've lost that dominance already. What's happening now by their protective defensive reaction is that they're becoming the isolated part, and that will wreak havoc on the standards of living of those parts of the world that try to play that game. You'd be far better off working something out with China to share the world economy before you lose the capacity to be a partner in such a sharing. My next update has to do with the class struggle. The struggle between the employer who wants to wring every last drop of profit out of the workers, the employees that the employer can, and the employees who don't want to become half a human because they have no time for themselves, no space, no balance between their work life and their home life, and all the rest. That struggle has always been there throughout the last 4 centuries of capitalism's growth. And now it's happening, but in a place you might not have noticed. The place is called the struggle between distance work, people who work from home, versus people, many of those people who used to work in the factory or the office or the store. And the hostility between the two classes doesn't go away. It's only a new situation, and therefore a new set of ways of struggling. And the one that came to mind in the last few weeks really struck me as it may have struck you if you saw the stories. There are many ways in which employers try to supervise, to survey, to control, to monitor, or to put it bluntly, spy on their employees. They want to fire those that don't work as hard as they want them to. They want to threaten those that they caught them. And one of the ways they've done it, particularly for workers who work from home, is to develop software which exists to monitor how many times you hit the keys on your computer at home. And just as with that struggle ever since time began, and there were employees and employers, which means mostly the last 4 centuries, employees have been ingenious. They developed machines and software programs that can make the keys on a computer jiggle with the same noise an electric result of your actually hitting the keys you want to hit. So that a monkey could be doing this and the machines wouldn't know because they just count the clicks, count the jiggling. So that what is the lesson here? Whatever you do to control your employees, they are busy working out of that control. You only let them go to the bathroom for so many minutes. Okay, they will figure out how to spill something and get it a few minutes extra to clean it up. It never stops. All employees know it. All employers know it. I remember in the offices of the universities where I taught, people magically disappearing the stapler, the scotch tape. These were people who didn't need those things. These were people who could afford to buy them. But their bitterness at being manipulated, their bitterness at being nickeled and dimed, saw them get back at the employer by taking home the stapler until they had too many staplers. The sad thing about this is not that the struggle is endless. The sad thing is both employers and employees long ago accepted it. And they keep trying, the one to dominate, the employer to survey, to spy on, to control, to threaten, and the employee to evade, to secretly do this or that, to hide, to dissimulate one way or another. Better off for both of them would be to ask the question, could we rearrange the workplace so that we weren't at each other all the time? That this endless, absurd struggle that exhausts us on both sides could be put aside. And of course, the answer is known. If the workplace wasn't in a situation of opposition, a few people at the top running the show and a mass of employees evading the surveillance. If the workplace was a co-op where people were the same, where all the employees were together their own boss, like a community that rotated the leadership function, then they wouldn't be at each, everybody would be a boss and an employee, and the absurdity of this endless struggle could finally be overcome. Last story is so grotesque, I will only be brief. It comes from the Reuters news agency, the #1 news agency in the United Kingdom and around the world, one of the leading sources of news. They broke a story very recently about an activity of the U.S. military. My guess is this is the tip of the iceberg. The U.S. military, for years, during the pandemic, worked in the island of the Philippines, a major nation in Asia, against COVID vaccinations, undermining them, reducing their number, reducing their popularity. They used it as a way to fight against China because the Philippines, being unable to afford the expensive vaccines from the United States, bought the less expensive Chinese vaccines, as many countries did. I don't know what happened in others, but thanks to Reuters, we know that the United States military used your taxes and mine to pay to fight against COVID vaccinations. That's the U.S. military whose boss was arguing that Americans have to get vaccines, was imposing vaccines on large numbers of Americans. Imagine it. That's how the Cold War mentality, which Reuters says cost the lives of how many Filipinos, subjected them to the disease, and raises the whole question. What is the behavior of the United States? And everyone in the Philippines now knows this story. This is a very serious expose. Stay with us. We've come to the end of the first half. We're going to have a fascinating interview with Kristen Gonzalez when we return. Friends, I don't want to insult your intelligence. I know that you know that it costs money to produce these programs, to have the people working on the different aspects that lead us to deliver a show every week. Please help us if you can, for whatever amount you can. It's really easy. Go to our website, democracyatwork.info, and there you'll see the ways to donate. And likewise, go to Patreon, where Democracy at Work has a really fine audience that is supportive of us, and we ask you to consider joining them. Thank you. Welcome back, friends, to the second half of today's economic update. I am very proud to bring to our cameras and our microphones Kristen Gonzalez. She is a former community activist, but she currently represents, and that's partly why we have her today, New York State Senate District 59, covering parts of western Queens, northern Brooklyn, and the east side of Manhattan. She's the youngest woman ever elected to the New York State Senate and is chair of the Internet and Technology Committee there. And in that capacity, she helped pass legislation protecting critical infrastructure from cyber attacks, and she helped safeguard the right to an abortion by protecting private health data. I want to read you one quotation that I found from her, because I think it'll say more than anything I could say by way of description about why she's on this program and why we've been excited to bring her. Quote, "The ruling class makes billions each year, turning things that all of us are entitled to into privileges we have to pay for." Well, what a thing to say. And the courage of that is what I am sure is part of why she's here. So first of all, Kristen, if I may call you that, welcome to the program.
Yeah. It's so good to be here. It's really exciting to have a chance to speak with a constituent and get to know you in a whole other way. So thank you for having me.
Okay, my pleasure. Let's begin. If I understand, your first election that brought you into the Senate, you were able to win by a very large majority of the votes. If my research is good, about 25% of a margin over your next closest competitor. Tell me, for a person who has the aroma of socialism about her, and I know you're not the only one here in New York at all, there are many now in New York, why were you elected with such a large margin? In other words, that seems to be remarkable for anyone, but perhaps doubly so for you.
That's a wonderful question. So we had a really hard primary. We had a redistricting process that created a brand new Senate district that didn't exist as a result of the census. And then once the initial new Senate district was drawn, we had been running. It was a Brooklyn and Queens district, a lot of working class communities. Those lines were actually overturned by the highest court in New York. And the lines were redrawn again. So we had a redistricting, which gave me a unique three-borough state Senate district, including Western Queens in Astoria, Long Island City, Northern Brooklyn and Greenpoint, Williamsburg, and the east side of Manhattan from 14th Street all the way to the UN. It's the only three-borough district that exists, and it actually has been, and in our primary and even now, a really good fit for me as someone who came from a working class background, born and raised in Queens. My mom was a teacher. I spent my time organizing because I realized that what unites our three boroughs is our values as working class New Yorkers, our belief that we all deserve to live dignified lives, have affordable housing, and housing as a human right, deserve clean air to breathe and climate justice, deserve, universal health care. And those were the main three issues that we ran on in our primary. They reign true today. And when we ran that primary and centered those issues, we also built a massive coalition of organizations, including the Democratic Socialists of America and the Working Families Party, and then activist organizations. We had unions endorse us. We had other electeds endorse us. And all of that together built this left coalition that knocked doors, talked to voters, brought this positive vision for a better New York to everyone. And I think that's really what resonated across the district and gave us the resounding win that we had.
Is it fair to say, based on what you've just said, that a progressive candidate with a clearly progressive program can attract not only voters, but victories of the sort that you achieved? Is it fair to draw that conclusion?
I think so. The thing I always talk about is a lot of our principles as democratic socialists and in democratic socialism are principles for working people, and that resonates whether or not you're a member of the organization. So yeah, I think progressives, democratic socialists are able to win, and I have, and I'm happy to talk about it, but I had worked in the Democratic Party. I had worked in, the White House under the Obama administration and Senator Schumer's office. I'd worked in city council before. And in all of those places, I often saw a lot of special interest corporations and not the voices of just everyday people. And it was coming back to Queens and organizing locally is when I learned about Congresswoman Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez's campaign. That's what got me involved. And it was in her campaign and in spaces with DSA that I heard folks talking about how we need our voices heard, how the best path for change is from the bottom up. And I saw her win. And I saw those ideas be popular, and we've continued to organize. And just like then, again, we're bringing it to our state Senate district, and all of our working class values and progressives have continued to win since then.
Let me ask you from the other side. Did you discover that your association with the DSA or socialism in more general terms, did it hurt you in any way in terms of your campaign? Was it was it an obstacle? You've explained how it was useful and positive, but what about the other side? There are parts of the United States, as you know, where such a label
Yes.
would be the end of your political possibilities. Clearly, that wasn't the case here. But did you encounter a serious problem with the association with socialism?
In my primary, I do not think so. I certainly have encountered folks who, at the doors maybe don't know what it means to be a democratic socialist and will have some preconceived notions about what it means based on maybe mass media or misrepresentations of it. And it really was an opportunity to have those conversations and explain that the reason again, as someone who would come from the Democratic Party and identify as a democratic socialist is because I believe in housing as a human right, a green New York, universal health care, in free CUNY and SUNY, all of these core principles that make it really clear and a set of morals about how we should be governing and regulating that really guide me. And of course, very much represent what I believe in as someone who grew up in a largely immigrant and working class community, a diverse community, where I saw people really struggle to have a dignified life, right? So it was a great opportunity to have those conversations. And when we had those conversations, I found that those ideas were popular, people agreed, and people are continuing to agree. And then in addition to that, I will add, I was endorsed as part of a larger slate of candidates with New York City DSA, and they were assembly candidates, state Senate candidates. And in having the slate, it was centered around a green New York, but it gave us another chance to bring these ideas to a wider audience. And the organization, knocked a lot of doors and had a lot of those conversations. So it certainly was helpful to be part of a slate, part of a larger slate. And then finally, we also had, like I mentioned, this broad coalition. So we got a chance to talk to a lot of constituents about what it meant to have co-governance, to in office be informed by all of the organizations that have endorsed me. And now that I've taken office and it's been a year and a half, it's been really wonderful to go back to all of our endorsing organizations and, engage them on different issues. For example, when I joined DSA, I was doing tech action working group. So I was organizing specifically around tech issues. So we're, incorporating the tech action working group into the AI legislation that we're working on. When I ran for office, I talked a lot about the Invest in Our New York campaign, which Working Families Party was a big part of. So I've been talking to Working Families Party about that. So again, it's nice to see organizations kind of come together. It's nice to be informed and continue working together. And it's something that our constituents also have liked to see.
It's also very powerful here in the future of the United States that people who are progressive are willing to run for office, are willing to help build these kinds of coalitions. That's how, political change comes. Let me ask you a question that looks forward. Do you think it will be possible here in the state of New York, where you are located, for there ever to be a time when enough of you will be there to begin to change the fundamentals, the tax structure, so it doesn't fall disproportionately on poor and middle income people, so that corporations begin to pay what they once did in America in terms of percentages and don't get away with what they get in now. I'm a professor of economics. I'm all too aware of the injustice of the tax system, and it is so fundamental. Is that something you can imagine changing, especially in New York, where the corporate America is stronger perhaps than anywhere else?
I do see a future where we can tax the ultra wealthy, where we can, um, you know, move towards a system where we have publicly owned, publicly operated infrastructure that supports all parts of our lives. That's really what got, again, me excited and involved, whether it's, you know, public internet or public power, right? And when I say public power, in New York, what that's looked like is the fight to build and own our own renewable energy sources, which is something we won on by passing the Build Public Renewables Act last year without having a massive number of I guess, electeds who identify as democratic socialists. And what that tells me is that, again, these ideas are popular. We are really good at building coalitions and working with others. And this bright future where we, again, tax the ultra wealthy, we invest in our communities and the health of our communities is possible and popular. And we're already starting to lay the foundation to get to delivering for working people. And so, yeah, I definitely, I'm in this work, even though it's a hard political moment, because I am fundamentally an optimist and I believe in the power of our electoral project. And so, a strong state level government, a strong city government that can do that is important. So I would say I do see that future. And then I'll end with saying that there are times that, I have colleagues who very much do not identify as democratic socialists and will maintain that they don't, but they'll say, that the wealth inequality in New York is out of control. It's like we don't tax folks appropriately. We don't tax corporations, or we'll get to a budget season and we don't have enough money to cover social services. And someone will say, some of these companies have made a ton of money in the last few years. Shouldn't they be paying more? And those like aha moments are amazing because I'm like, that is it. That is the like a result of like us talking about it, a result of us, being very clear about why the world and why capitalism has been failing us. And those are really moments to build and grow. So yes, it's been it's been exciting.
In a way, we only have a minute left. In a way, you've answered this question, but I want to put it on the table. I know from our surveys and so on that there are large numbers of young people all over the United States and beyond, more or less your age, who are wondering about getting involved, who are even wondering about running for office, even thinking about such a part of their own lives. What do you say to them? Based on what you've already done and experienced, what do you say to them that are looking to hear from someone just like you?
Oh my gosh. I say, please do. Your voices, your perspective are so desperately needed in all of the places of power. I, you know, like I mentioned, I had worked in some of the highest echelons of government, right? I'd been in the White House, but I didn't know that the best way to affect change in our community was coming back and going to a meeting and talking to my neighbors who are struggling with the same things and collectively organizing. And that power that comes from the many, it's not just a talking point, it's something we've lived. When you talk to your neighbors, when you knock a door, when you organize as a young person, especially, you have the power to affect change in a way that you don't need to necessarily even be an elected official and run for office, right? In any place, in any issue. Certainly, as the youngest woman ever elected to the New York State Senate, I am living and seeing how desperately we do need young representation and our generation to have a voice and a seat at the table when decisions that will affect our futures are made. So I would encourage that young person to organize in their community, build locally, to run if they want to run. And if they're not thinking of running, that is totally okay. But that in whatever way they can, they absolutely have the power, and to help the next person to have an effect on their community. And I would ask them from the bottom of my heart to take that step, because it may seem scary, but it is the difference between us having a future that is run by oligarchs and a future that is for all of us, that protects us and gives us the lives we deserve. And I know that future is winnable if we work together towards it.
Thank you very much, Kristen Gonzalez. It's been interesting for us to see and understand the perspective of someone like you. And again, my thanks for joining us, and all best to you as well.
I appreciate the time. Thank you so much. And always, for anyone who may be watching, our office is here if you're in New York City, or campaigns around if you ever want to reach out.
Fine. And to my audience, as usual at the end of our show, I look forward to speaking with you again next week.